Make sure it's going. There you go. Thank you for that. And I'll just use a little bit. I'll splice flash yours in. You'll never know the difference. The colors might be different, but that's all. Okay, so where does the vestibular nucleus get its information from? The vestibular nucleus gets its information from the vestibular system. Okay, the vestibular apparatus is located in we're going to talk about your inner ear. We'll talk about it at the end of the semester. So I'll represent that here as a little ear, right? And inside the ear, I'm just going to say 3 different loops. Well, that's your vestibular apparatus. And that information is going to be bilateral. Okay, so you're getting information into the system from the vestibular apparatus. Okay, so this information coming from the vestibular apparatus is hooked up to the vestibular system and getting that information. Okay, the vestibular system is going to be responsible for detecting if you're upright against gravity, if you're moving in any way, if you have any head movement, the position of your head in 3-dimensional space, all of that. And we'll get to that when we talk about the vestibular system later in the course. Okay, lots of information there. Yes, Paul?
And it goes down to the vestibular nucleus?
It all comes in through the 8th cranial nerve to the vestibular nucleus. So the vestibular nucleus is one of the nuclei associated with the 8th cranial nerve. The other is the auditory nucleus. This information from the vestibular system comes in directly to the vestibular nucleus through the 8th cranial nerve. Questions about that? That's a simple one. Yep.
Is the vestibular nucleus bilateral?
Mm-hmm. Yep, the whole thing's bilateral. I'm just choosing to make it really simple. I'm doing most of my labeling on this side and then, my drawing over here. Okay, so that. Good. Questions? Yes, Julia?
I know this is the vestibular apparatus
Does it, the information coming from the vestibular apparatus, no, that information coming out of the vestibular apparatus is traveling through the 8th cranial nerve. Okay. And we'll get there when we talk about the vestibular system. We will have a whole class on that. So. And that's why I like to, if somebody is even in a coma, work with plenty of people in a coma, I know if I get that person upright against gravity, that I can cause their postural extensors to fire. And this is how that works. Okay, one of my favorite pathways because of that. It's automatic. No cranial function, no cortical function required, right? This is an automatic system. This is just what happens when you get somebody upright against gravity. And if someone's in a coma and they don't have that cortical function working right then, I can get them stronger just by sitting them upright or standing them upright. Yes, Gavin? I think I understand your question. Let me see if I answer it. You tell me if I've given you an answer. Okay. What's happening is it's the cerebellum's job to detect or to be told certain pieces of information. Okay. It uses 3 different pathways that we're going to learn about to gain that information. So this is afferent information coming from the body overall. The first piece of information it gets is through the vestibular nucleus. So afferent information comes in through the vestibular nucleus to the cerebellum, giving information about where the head and body is in 3-dimensional space. Are you upright against gravity or not? And that the cerebellum takes that information and then decides what to do with it. Okay? So the cerebellum is like a big information. It's a big supercomputer. Our supercomputer has lots of information coming into it all the time. Right? That it knows where you are. Kind of scary. Okay? Did that answer your question? I think so. All right. All right. Any other questions about the vestibulocerebellar pathways? This is the easiest of the 3. The next is the dorsal spinocerebellar pathway. Okay. This one's pretty easy. So the dorsal and ventral spinocerebellar pathways are very similar. There's only one main difference, okay? But we'll start with the dorsal spinocerebellar pathway, which is the easiest of the two. And again, this is going to be your thalamus, okay? These are your peduncles. This is superior. This is middle. And this is inferior. Okay. And then we also have to consider our old friends PMC and SMA, part of motor planning, right? So this is the premotor cortex and the supplementary motor area are up here. Okay. They're the ones that we talked about being involved in motor planning before. And we know we're in the spinocerebellar function.
Can you repeat those two again?
Yeah, the premotor cortex and the supplementary motor area. Those are the ones that reside just rostral to the precentral gyrus, and they're involved in motor planning. Let's see why. Okay, we also talked before about the areas that are associated with the spinocerebellar pathways, and those are the spinocerebellar function regions. We're going to have your vermis here, and we're also going to have your paravermis. Okay, so I'll label that as this is the vermal region, or the vermis of the cerebellum, and then this is the paravermis. Associated, does anybody remember that the name of the nucleus is associated with the vermis? It's the same as vestibulocerebellum. It's going to be your fastigial nucleus. Fastigial nucleus. Okay, and the name of the nucleus that's associated with the paravermal region, that's going to be that interposed nucleus. Okay, so remember the vermal region is going to be receiving information about non-conscious proprioception coming from the trunk, and then the paravermis is receiving information about the non-conscious proprioception from extremities. Interposed nucleus is associated with the paravermal region. Okay, we also have associated with each particular region has its own Purkinje cell, and that Purkinje cell is synapsed already with its particular nucleus. So we have a Purkinje cell there for the paravermal region, and we also have a Purkinje cell here for the vermal region. And that's already synapsed. So those are your Purkinje cells. There's a Purkinje cell associated with the vermal region, or paravermal, and here's a Purkinje cell associated with the vermis. Okay, so does everybody see where I am? What's happening? Okay. Other important players that we're going to talk about here. Heard a little bit before about this guy, the red nucleus here in the midbrain. And again, the red nuclei are going to be bilateral, but I'm just going to draw the contralateral to the side. So that brings the point. Okay. And we know the red nucleus sends out axons that decussate in the midbrain and then come all the way down cerebrospinal tract. And another important piece that we're going to see, draw it in this lighter blue, in the level at the level of the medulla, you have this diffuse group of nuclei that are involved in awareness, awakeness, or consciousness. Okay, those are going to be, that's your reticular formation. information is there, and we know coming out of the reticular formation, we have axons just come straight on down, no decussation. That's your reticulospinal tract. And those are all the major players. Okay, and this is going to be your dorsal spinocerebellar tract. So if we scroll on down to the bottom here and look at this, this is a cross section, right? This is my cross section of the spinal cord. I'm going to have my first order neuron, my first order sensory neuron sitting right here. Okay, and it's going to detect information about non-conscious proprioception for trunk and extremities. Okay, so it's receiving, so this first order neuron is receiving information about non-conscious proprioception from both the trunk and the extremities. Questions? Does everybody remember that? Remember where we are? And we also know that we had drawn in previously that this information is going to travel up. This is the dorsal spinocerebellar tract right here. And I'll put that in bilaterally so I can label it. This is going to be my dorsal spinocerebellar tract. Okay. Do you have a question, Jacob? Or do you have a question? Happy to answer it.
This is non-conscious proprioception.
Yeah, non-conscious proprioception from trunk and extremities. So information from the entire body is coming in through the dorsal spinocerebellar tract. Set everything up. So what happens is this neuron comes in and synapses right away in the dorsal gray horn. Okay, it's for the dorsal spinocerebellar pathway. It synapses with a very specific cell. This is called Clark's nucleus. C-L-A-R-K-E' nucleus. So, information about non-conscious proprioception coming from trunk and extremities comes in, and it synapses immediately in the dorsal gray horn with the special nucleus known as Clark's nucleus. Okay. That information, that Clark's nucleus sends out axons that travel ipsilaterally through the dorsal spinocerebellar tract and travel up through the rest of the spinal cord, up through the medulla, and enter into the inferior cerebellar peduncle, synapse with the Purkinje cell that's associated with the vermal area if it's information about the trunk non-conscious proprioception, or other axon synapses with this Purkinje cell associated with the paravermal region if it's information about non-conscious proprioception coming from the extremities. Yes, Alicia? Try. Is that better? John? Johnny? That's the first thing I saw.
Oh, so after it goes through the cortical nucleus, you said it goes through the dorsal spinal cerebellar tract?
It travels up through the dorsal spinal cerebellar tract, just like all the other sensory tracts would travel up through their tracts, like SCT and DCML.
Okay.
So, yes. Mackenzie, did you have a question?
Yeah, once that happens, then it either goes two ways. It goes to the first one or the second one.
Okay. So the first one is, that's a Purkinje cell that's set up in the vermal area. So that's set up to receive non-conscious proprioception information coming from the trunk. So that non-conscious proprioception goes through the vermal area, and non-conscious proprioception information coming from extremities goes to the paravermal Purkinje cell.
So it's just either of those pathways. There's no other pathway.
Nope, no other place it's going to go. Just those two possibilities. Yeah, Mikey?
Is cortical nucleus in the same place as the second order neuron for the SCT, or is this sooner than the gelatinous area?
It's two different areas.
Okay.
It's both in the dorsal gray horn,
Yeah.
but two different areas of the dorsal gray horn. Yeah, one's a specific nucleus, the other's a specific area. Any other questions? Okay, so let's look at the easiest one we have here is, let's start out with the vestigial nucleus. Okay, the vestigial nucleus is going, so it's receiving information from the vermal region about non-conscious proprioception coming from the trunk. Okay, vestigial nucleus then sends out axons through the superior cerebellar peduncle and makes contact with reticular formation, synapses with reticular formation. It's also going to send out information traveling through the superior cerebellar peduncle, traveling up here to the thalamus. Okay. Once in the thalamus, it's going to synapse with a neuron, no particular kind of neuron, just a neuron in the thalamus. Okay, and that neuron sends out axons that relay the information to the supplementary motor area and the premotor cortex. Spinal cerebellar information coming in through the dorsal spinal cerebellar tract, travels up through the dorsal spinal cerebellar tract, enters the cerebellum through the inferior cerebellar peduncle, and non-conscious proprioception coming from the trunk synapses with the Purkinje cell in the vermis, which is associated with the vestigial nucleus. Vestigial nucleus receives that information and then sends out information through the superior cerebellar peduncle, synapses with the reticular formation, and it also sends information to the thalamus. And that thalamus relays the information through another neuronal cell body, an axon, to the motor planning area, supplementary motor cortex, premotor cortex, or supplementary motor area. Questions about that? Yes.
Can you just point with your finger what you just said on the board?
Try. So, information traveling up, information from non-conscious proprioception from the trunk, only the trunk. Let's talk about that first. Comes in, synapses immediately with something known as Clark's nucleus. Okay, travels up through the dorsal spinal cerebellar tract, all the way up the spinal cord, through the medulla, and enters into the cerebellum through the inferior cerebellar peduncle. And only non-conscious proprioception information coming from the trunk is going to synapse here with this Purkinje cell that's set up in the vermal area. Okay, that Purkinje cell is hooked up with this vestigial nucleus. It's its deep cerebellar nucleus. Okay, so I'm right here. Vestigial nucleus then sends out axons that travel through the superior cerebellar peduncle and make a synapse with the reticular formation. It also sends out axons traveling through the superior cerebellar peduncle up to the thalamus, synapsing with this nucleus, sends out axons to the premotor cortex and supplementary motor area that's involved in motor planning. Johnny, did you have a question?
So does information that goes through the superior cerebellar peduncle go that goes to the reticular formation, is that for awareness and consciousness? Because that's what the reticular formation does, or
It's more for stimulation of postural extensors if need be. Because remember that if the non-conscious information that's coming into the system is coming from the trunk. So if need be, trunk extension can be stimulated. But that's what I think about it. Okay, I'm not saying it's always stimulated, but it can stimulate trunk extension through the reticular formation. And there's more, but there's more. We're just in the very beginning part. That's actually.
I'm sure this doesn't really matter according to the picture, but does it go to both PMC and SMA?
Yeah, both PMC and SMA, you can think of them as both being part of motor planning. We're not going to go into more than that. Yeah.
I just want to clarify, this is ipsilateral, correct?
Good question. Yeah, this is all ipsilateral. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Okay, everything here so far is ipsilateral. Yes. Steph?
Does it always go to the reticular formation and the thalamus?
Yeah. Those are just accidental connections. Felicia, did you have a question before I ask Talia?
So when you said trunk only to the vermis, so then the extremities will go to the peripheral?
Yeah. Yes. Yep. Right.
Can you repeat what she just said?
Yeah, sure. She said if the non-conscious proprioception information from the trunk is only going to the vermis, does the non-conscious proprioception information coming from extremities only go to paravermis? Yes. That's accurate. Very true. Another important point. If you have a problem with your cerebellum, if you have a problem in your cerebellum, let's say that you had a stroke that's affected your cerebellum, any cerebellar injury is going to present ipsilateral, not contralateral, because there's no crossing over that you've seen yet. There will be a little, and then it'll come back. So, okay, all cerebellar injury presents ipsilateral. That means if I've had a stroke, God forbid, that's affected the right side of my cerebellum, I'm going to have problems with the right side of my body, and we'll look at that, what that looks like later. Does that make sense? So it's all ipsilateral. Where cortical lesions are always contralateral, cerebellar lesions are always ipsilateral with presentation. Mikey?
So there's no significance with the track crossing over to that thalamus on the left, right? Like,
It crosses over to the contralateral thalamus. That's right. Yes, it crosses over to the contralateral thalamus. And because, okay, so good point. Thinking about it, if you think about it, if I had a lesion up here, it's going to affect the opposite side of my body. But if I had a lesion here, it affects the same side. So it has to cross over to make that happen. We have to keep things consistent. Good question. Okay. Anybody else? Think you're getting it. All right. Not too bad, huh? Okay, that's this vermal area. Now, we also have information coming in from non-conscious proprioception information coming in from the extremities through this pathway too. Okay, again, we're synapsing with Clark's nucleus, and from Clark's nucleus, we're going to travel up. Okay, except this time, when we travel up through the dorsal spinal cerebellar tract, we're going to go through and do the same thing. Only we're going to now synapse with this Purkinje cell that's set up in the paravermal region, because it's responsible for receiving information, non-conscious proprioception, from the extremities. Okay, so the spinocerebellar pathways receive information from both the trunk and the extremities. And that Purkinje cell is already set up with its interposed nucleus, or the deep cerebellar nucleus that it uses. That interposed nucleus is going to send out axons that, again, travel through the superior cerebellar peduncle and synapse with the red nucleus. Okay. It's also going to send out axons, again, traveling through superior cerebellar peduncle that synapse with another nucleus in the thalamus, unnamed, that also synapses with the PMC and SMA. So you have information traveling to the motor planning area about the position, axial position or trunk position in three-dimensional space, as well as extremity position in three-dimensional space. Does that make sense, everybody? And that's important. Yes. Taylor Reeves.
What's the significance of going to the red nucleus versus where like is it because they go to tracks and that's all of it?
So let's think about the vestigial nucleus is sending out axons to the reticular formation here, and you know that the reticular formation is going to stimulate postural extensors. So it kind of makes sense, right? Because you're getting information about your trunk, and if need be, you can stimulate trunk extension. Okay. Now, as far as the interposed nucleus sending out axons to the red nucleus, we talked about this a long time ago, but the red nucleus is also involved in control of muscle tone. And muscle tone is going to vary. I mean, some people are what's called hypotonic, or don't have a lot of muscle tone, and some people have a huge amount of muscle tone. The red nucleus is involved in regulating that. Muscle tone specifically of the extremities, because that's the information. Okay? Does that help? That helps a little bit? Do you have another question, or is that? Okay. What does the reticular formation do? So that's information coming in about trunk position in three-dimensional space. And the information that's coming out is going to stimulate postural extensors. Right. If the person is conscious and awake and aware, that's where you want that extension to happen. So if you're getting that information in, that would be the response. Very few functional things that I can think of where you want to be curled over and scrunched into a ball. Does that make sense?
Don't be sick and tired.
All about function. Realize these are things that are always set up. It's automatic. You do not have to think about it. Okay, there is no thought involved here. Okay, so, Bella, if I asked you to close your eyes and touch your nose, did you do that?
Yeah.
She did it. She did a really good job, right? Okay, now I have another task for you. Can you close your eyes? Touch my nose. Got it?
I can't get even
Right? Because she has no information at all about where my nose is in three-dimensional space. But she knows exactly where hers is without even thinking about it. She knows where it is. Alex?
I understand like all cellular injuries are ipsilateral,
Right.
but the rubrospinal tract is contralateral. So once it hits the red nucleus, does it change?
Okay, so thinking about that, what happens is that when the interposed, can you see that? Yeah. When the interposed nucleus sends out its axons, it sends it to the contralateral red nucleus, which immediately decussates, and it's all ipsilateral, all on the same side.
So even though it goes contralateral, it switches right back to ipsilateral?
It doesn't switch back to ipsilateral. Red nucleus automatically decussates at the level of the midbrain, where it lives. Okay. Other questions? Yes. Yes.
So everything coming in is non-conscious perception.
Yes.
And then it comes through the dorsal spinal cerebellum tract.
Yep.
And that's when it goes to either one of the Purkinje cells.
If it's information coming from trunk, it goes to the Purkinje cell in the vermal area. If it's information coming from extremities, it goes to the Purkinje cell set up in the paravermal area.
And then that's when it goes to the nucleus and comes out.
Yeah. So In other words, if I have to make a decision, if I want to, so even asking Bella to touch her nose, if I ask her to touch her nose, she has to know where her hand is starting in three-dimensional space. It's very different than if her hand's on her lap and then she has to touch her nose, or if her hand were on her head and she had to touch her nose. The movements are completely different. I have to know where I'm starting, and that's the information about where you're starting. That's how that gets there, so you know. Others? Yeah, absolutely. Everything we draw is going to be show that the cerebellar lesions are present ipsilaterally with the patient. Any other questions? Okay. The good news is the dorsal spinal cerebellar pathway is identical to the ventral spinal cerebellar pathway, except one change, just one. Okay. So what I'd like to do is go ahead and just draw in pretty much everything that we had here, all the different players to start with. Okay, we'll start up here. We'll just go ahead and draw all those players in. So up here we have the PMC and the SMA. So the premotor cortex and your supplementary motor area, right? And that's all involved in motor planning. You have your thalamus. Here's your thalamus. Since I said they're both the same, we're just going to keep those nuclei the same. We're going to use, I'll use this. So there's going to be a nucleus in the thalamus, non-specific nucleus in the thalamus, and there's going to be another non-specific nucleus in the thalamus that we're going to use. Okay? Going down, we know we have our red nucleus. Red nucleus is sitting here in the midbrain. And the midbrain, we immediately decussate, and then we travel all the way down as the rubrospinal tract. That's old news. We also know that we have the reticular formation. What color did I make that? The reticular formation is that blue. Yeah, let's use this. So the reticular formation that I drew is going to be here. So diffuse body of nuclei present in the medulla, travel down, stay ipsilateral, travel down as the reticulospinal tract. We also delineated regions of the cerebellum into the vermis, which is in the middle, and then the paravermis, just lateral to that. We also had our Purkinje cells set up in the vermis, and the vermis are making contact with that vestigial nucleus. Okay, so here's my Purkinje cell making contact with my vestigial nucleus, and over in the paravermal region. Does anybody remember the name of the nucleus in the paravermal region? Interpose, good. So here's my interpose group of nuclei. Okay. I also have my Purkinje cell here in my paravermal region, and that's just hooked up to my interpose nuclei. So no differences. Everything looks exactly the same as what we just drew, right? Everybody with me? Everything's still there. Just one small change. Okay, and moving on down, looking at my cross section of the spinal cord. I'm also going to I'm going to draw in my ventral spinal cerebellar tract, which is going to be here, just a little bit more ventral to the dorsal. Okay, so this is a different tract from the spinal cord tract, but it's one we've talked about. And then label it. This is my ventral spinocerebellar tract. Ventral spinocerebellar tract. And we know that there's a first order neuron here sitting in the dorsal root ganglia that is responsible for picking up non-conscious, same as the dorsal, non-conscious proprioception from the trunk and the extremities. So carries the same exact information as the dorsal spinal cerebellar pathway. This is the ventral. And the ventral spinal cerebellar pathway, what it does is that here's these axons come in and they synapse not on Clark's nucleus, but a non-identified nucleus that resides in the dorsal gray horn. So I'll just draw the neuronal cell body there. Okay, information about non-conscious proprioception comes in, synapse with a non-specified nucleus, and the only difference between the dorsal and ventral is that this nucleus sends out axons that decussate immediately at the level of the spinal cord. And when they decussate immediately at the level of the spinal cord, they travel up the spinal cord, through the midbrain and the pons, all the way up, and they enter here into the superior cerebellar peduncle. Okay, it's the only pathway that enters into the superior cerebellar peduncle. And the problem is now we're contralateral, right? So what happens is these axons that came in through the contralateral superior cerebellar peduncle snake around behind the brainstem and synapse with Purkinje cell in the vermal area if it's non-conscious proprioception information coming from the trunk, or they synapse with Purkinje cell in the parabromal area if it's non-conscious proprioception information coming from extremities. Okay, so everything from there is exactly the same. The only difference is once we synapse here in the dorsal gray horn, we decussate, travel up, come in through the superior, and then come out around the back of the brainstem. And then synapse ipsilaterally. So the information remains ipsilateral. It travels contralateral for a little bit, but by the time all is said and done, it remains ipsilateral. Yes, Kayla?
So the little lesion, lesion in the spinal cord is contralateral, and then the cerebellum ipsilateral.
Ooh, okay. I like the question. Let's think about that.
Oh, I lied.
What happens if I have with the if only one half, let's say this is the left side, no, this is the right side. No, this is the right side. If I have a lesion in the spinal cord that only affected the right half of the spinal cord, would anything present? Would there be a loss of non-conscious proprioception from the trunk and extremities? Oh, I'm not picking on you. Would there be a loss of non-conscious proprioception if there's a lesion only on the right side of the spinal cord that affected the ventral spinal cerebellar pathway, only on the right side? Would it affect the information that reaches the level of the cerebellum? How about the dorsal spinal cerebellar pathway that travels on that other side? Yeah? It wouldn't be affected, right? So it's a redundant system. That's the answer to your question. Do you see that now? Yeah, there won't be any change because it's traveling up the dorsal or it's traveling up the ventral. It's redundancy in the system. So it's important to know that information. Okay. Complete spinal cord injury, not so much. But incomplete, only half, then you've got information coming into the cerebellum. Okay. Good question. Any other questions? Okay, so once we get to this level, we should know what's going to happen. That fastigial nucleus is going to send out axons that travel through the superior cerebellar peduncle, synapsing here with reticular formation. It's also going to send out axons that come through the superior cerebellar peduncle that synapse with neuronal cell body in the thalamus. And that neuronal cell body sends out axons to the PMC and SMA. I'll just put it on both, so in case there's any question that it hits both. It's involved in motor planning. That's information from trunk musculature, and then we have information coming from extremities. That information is transferred to the paravermal region, so the interposed nucleus responds by sending out axons that come through the superior cerebellar peduncle, synapse with the red nucleus, and also send out axons that come in here and synapse with nucleus in the thalamus. And that thalamus sends out axons that, I think this is the right color. No, it's not. These axons send out, this neuronal cell body sends out axons that synapse with both the PMC and the SMA. Okay, so you have information for motor planning purposes sent to the cortical region, so you know where your body is in three-dimensional space without even thinking about it. Right? This is all not conscious yet. Questions? Okay. That's it. That's the dorsal and spinal cerebellar tracts. Dorsal and ventral. Yes, Bella? Bruce?
Well, we just talked about it like it goes in like this correct, towards the right side, and then it crosses across to the left when they go into the field. So if you have a lesion on the spinal cord, you think it's
Here, let me show you. I think if I drew it this way, maybe you'll see it a little bit differently. So if I have a spinal cord, so here, okay, and then if I'm traveling, here's my dorsal spinal cerebellar tract, and then here's my ventral spinal cerebellar tract. Here. Right? Got it? Okay. Now, here's my dorsal root ganglia. So here's my neuron carrying the information. It's going to synapse right here. If I'm traveling dorsal spinal cerebellar tract, I'm going to come and go right to my dorsal spinal cerebellar tract, and then I'm going to go straight up. Okay? But if I'm ventral, if I'm coming in here and synapsing, here with my ventral, I'm going to come in and go up this side. Okay, now if both of the dorsal and ventral spinal cerebellar tracts are carrying the exact same information, no difference, trunk and extremity non-conscious proprioception, there is a lesion here in the spinal cord on the left side only. Does the information that reaches the cerebellum change at all? If there was a lesion on one side of the spinal cord, it wouldn't matter.
But would it still cause some deficits because it's not the full?
It doesn't cause any deficits in the reception of non-conscious proprioception information if it's only one side of the spinal cord that's been damaged. There's no change.
So you can, like, if it's been damaged, you can just leave it. Like, you don't need to do anything about it in the sense of medically, I don't know.
There wouldn't be anything you can do. I wish there were. That would be great if there could. But yeah, there's nothing you can do. Spinal cord injury is a spinal cord injury. Yes. I mean, and sometimes only small areas of the spinal cord are hit depending on what the problem is. But yes, definitely. Yes. Yes. Exercise immediately, goes up from the contralateral side and goes around the back of the brainstem. Is it lateral both ways? Since it's all the same side of the cerebellum, they're both ipsilateral. Any lesion in the cerebellum is going to present ipsilaterally. Okay. Hopefully that's clear. All right, let's move on. This is same as the other dorsal, except that one snaking around behind, kind of crossing over and then coming back behind. This is the last pathway. This is the cerebellar pathway. And the cerebrocerebellar pathway, if you remember, just deals with these lateral hemispheres here. So I'll just put these here to demarcate. Okay. And again, we have our thalamus here. Okay. Other players that we need to know about are your the PMC and the SMA are still here. Does anybody remember the name of the nucleus that's associated with the lateral hemisphere or the cerebrocerebellar pathway? Teeth. Dentate. There's your dentate nucleus. Looks like a set of teeth, a half a set of teeth, half a set of dentures. Okay. And that dentate nucleus is associated with a Purkinje cell. And these Purkinje cells are located in lateral hemispheres or the cerebrocerebellar area, functional area of the cerebellum. And this Purkinje cell is already associated with the dentate nucleus. Okay, we get a new set of nuclei to learn about, and these nuclei are located in the pons, and they're called pontine nuclei. Okay, pontine nuclei. Draw it in there now because there's also going to be a player in the thalamus. There's going to be a neuronal cell body that relays information to the premotor cortex and the sublunar motor area in the thalamus. Okay. This is a relatively simple one, I think. So I like to think about cerebrocerebellar as thinking about movement or motor planning for complex motor tasks. You know, things like shooting a free throw or, running down a rocky trail. I don't know if there's any runners here. But all that's, you have to think about it, right? Thinking about moving. So the motor planning area sends out a question about movement. Okay, are we ready to move? Is it safe to move? Or where are we in relationship to this movement? Or how are we going to put all this stuff together? Kinds of information. That information travels down here and synapses with the pontine nuclei. That pontine nuclei sends out an axon through that major conduit that we talked about earlier, that middle cerebellar peduncle. This axon synapses with the Purkinje cell. Okay. That Purkinje cell is already hooked up to the, here it is, deep cerebellar nucleus, or the dentate nucleus. I didn't label that, sorry. This is your dentate nucleus. Alright, the dentate nucleus then sends out axons that travel through the superior cerebellar peduncle and synapse with the nucleus in the thalamus. Okay, and then this nucleus in the thalamus then relays important information back to the PMC and SMA. Okay, so that's thinking about movement or motor planning for complex motor tasks. Anything you can think of, like all kinds of complex motor tasks are cerebrocerebellar. Okay. Questions? Okay. Let's go ahead and just take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to stay here. We're not going to go back. If you need to leave and use the restroom, walk around for a minute, just take 5 minutes, and then we're going to do some motor skills back in here, or some skills back in here.